Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Freely Nourished, the podcast that empowers you to break the cycle of dieting by teaching you to nourish your body well. I am your host, registered dietitian Erin Casey, and I am also the owner of New You Nutrition Counseling, where we believe that you can reach any of your healthcare goals at just about any body size. So, if you are ready to let go of that toxic cycle of trying to shrink yourself in order to be healthier and happier, and instead focus on finding ways to nourish your body, move your body, and feel good in your body, join us. I have all of the links to all of my socials, of course, and my website, which you can find all of the services that I offer. Some of them are, one-on-one counseling, but then, of course, we also have several digital products, things that you can purchase and kind of work through on your own. So a couple of digital courses, things of that nature. So there's a lot on there, and they're all at a lot of different price points. So there really is a pretty good variety of something for everyone. Even if you are still looking to lose weight and you just kind of want a place to start that doesn't sound like a restrictive diet, give it a look. It is a place where you will likely find something that is kind of a sound solution to what you're looking for. Um, and today, I'll be fully transparent with you all. I exactly zero notes on this show. It's something that I kind of just hopped on and wanted to record off the cuff for you, because it's something that I keep hearing a lot about. And the fact is that some of you are listening to Joe Rogan and it shows. And I don't have, anything against Joe Rogan per se, but I will say he does tend to have, if you don't know, Joe Rogan I think he's a comedian by trade, but he has a podcast where he invites on lots of various kind of quote unquote health experts. And these health experts very often pitch these kind of extremist ideas of what what we should or should not be doing with our bodies, things that we should or should not be eating, practices that we should or should not be engaging in. And I think honestly, to Joe Rogan, it's kind of more like a socialistic experiment of like, wow, like this is kind of the extremes that different people go to. But the part of it that I find frankly irresponsible is the fact that none of these people are vetted. Most of them do not hold clinical or even like college level degrees in their field of quote unquote expertise. Um, and most of the stuff they're pitching, there may be a study or two, case in point, what we're going to talk about today, but there's definitely not a significant body of data. Um, so they're kind of, creating this whole philosophy around food, around body, around health that frankly is based on very minimal evidence. And to me, that's irresponsible. It's irresponsible on their part. It's irresponsible on Joe Rogan for giving them a platform. So here is my chance to clap back. So like I said, I have very few notes, but I talk about this all the time. I get questions about it all the time. So it's something that I thought, I could, just hop on here and share those thoughts with you all, since it's probably something that you've heard about and are wondering too. So that is the carnivore diet. So it has the carnivore diet kind of initially came out, I want to say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, like 2018, 2019, maybe. And it's kind of died down for a while, and then it's kind of made a resurgence. And I think that's kind of due to influencers such as Joe Rogan, but there certainly are others kind of giving it more airspace than frankly it deserves. So the carnivore diet, if you are not familiar, is honestly exactly what it sounds like. You eat like a carnivore, so you eat very few fruits and vegetables. You eat mostly meats, and you eat very little, if any, grains, starches, things of that nature. You can definitely do things like vegetables. I think on it are okay, but fruits are not. It's basically you're eating primarily protein, and that's about it. Um, and I'm not going to elaborate on it any farther than that, because in a sentence, the carnivore diet is bogus. There's no data about it. It's one of those that like a doctor somewhere kind of created this like mentality and wrote a book about it, and then like it just took to the media. But even like there's no data to it. There's it's not been evaluated formally in studies. There's no benefits to it. You can Google and find otherwise, but what you find is frankly people who don't know what they're talking about. And of course I could just leave the podcast at that, right? And be like, well, that's it. That really would have been probably more appropriate for like TikTok or Instagram or something like that. But I think it's a really good opportunity for us to unpack kind of why this happens and how it happens, because there is so much misinformation out there. And as somebody who has a whole master's degree too, actually, in nutrition, it is very frustrating to come across information that is convincing. It's very convincing, and it's kind of one of those, I know in the back of my head from all of my training that that's not true, and I can unpack the ways that it's not true. But if you don't have that level of education in nutrition, it's going to sound convincing. I mean, there's even doctors and other health professionals who know a lot, but don't know a lot about nutrition per se. Um, they've been, you know, kind of fooled by some of this. And I think it's just because so much of it is one-sided and it's slanted. And I think that's just kind of the where we are right now with news media and popular press and social media. I think makes all of that so much worse because every voice is just amplified by 1,000 conversations that we used to have, you know, over lunch or over dinner or in our families or amongst our friend groups are now projected out into the world wide web for the world to see. And it's great in the fact that like we're all connecting and talking to people who maybe we wouldn't otherwise, but it's also kind of furthering some of those misunderstandings. So I'm going to use the diet as an example for today, but keep in mind this applies to pretty much any diet with a name. So that's definitely going to include keto. It's going to include the blood type diet. I would say I would even go so far as to like things like the Mediterranean, maybe even the DASH diet. Those things, Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, actually do have a lot of clinical evidence behind them, but what has been evaluated versus what is in the media are two different things. Um, Intermittent fasting, all of those kinds of things. So, right. So, like, really, any diet that has a name, this is probably going to apply. And I welcome, for you all in comments. Let me know what what other diets you've heard of, other questions you have. I think it's a really good place for discussion. But basically, any diet that has a name, like the name was coined by someone, right? So that someone is usually a doctor or a researcher. It is somebody who probably has some level of credential, some level of health education and credential. But just kind of like there's good cops and there's bad cops. There's good doctors and there's bad doctors. There's good researchers and there's bad researchers. There's, well, I was going to say there's good politicians and bad politicians. I think that was a little dicier, but the point is there's in any field, there are going to be people who are really comprehensive, really thorough, really responsible, and really kind of make sound, grounded, evidence-based decisions. And when I say evidence-based, I mean based on a collective body of scientific research, not just one or two papers that were done off the cuff in some lab somewhere. Um, and then there are going to be people who want to make money. And the people who want to make money are going to do the things that are the most sensationalized and kind of sexy, so to speak. So those are the people, again, you all know this probably from listening to this podcast, but if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right? Like there is not a diet out there that we have found yet that for everyone is going to lower your blood sugar, help you lose weight, fix your cardiovascular labs, like, your cholesterol and things like that. Reverse hypertension is going to make you come off of all of your medicines. Like that just simply doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen. Not only does it not happen on like a population level, it doesn't happen in studies. There are, when we think about scientific data, we want to think about a couple of things. One, we want to think about the size of the population that study used, right? So a study that has 3 people in it really tells us nothing because that is 3 people. The 3 people probably come from this kind of the second thing we want to think about is like demographics, like who are those people? If you only have 3 people in a study, they probably all work in the same office, have the same job. They probably know each other, same social circles, same socioeconomic status status, same access to food, same access to healthcare. Again, that's why we want a broad range of participants. We want a lot of participants and we want them to be very diversified. Because if we're looking for something that is going to affect us on a human level, we want it to be something that we want it to be something that is going to apply to all humans, right? No matter of their age, gender, and there's obviously going to be like exceptions to this, for example, birth control, right? Like obviously that doesn't have to affect people who are genetically male. But we want all of these medications, these diets, et cetera, to apply broadly. Or if you're going to make broad statements, you need to have a broad population base in the studies that you do to evaluate that. Um, and a lot of these studies simply don't. A lot of them aren't even done in humans. So in the case of intermittent fasting, for example, most of those studies were done in rats and mice. There are very few studies done in humans, and the studies done in humans show no effect. The diet had no effect on weight loss. It had no effect on, um, you know, cardiovascular markers. It had very minimal effect on blood sugar. I won't say it had no effect, but the effect is like not nearly as drastic as it was when we see it in rodents. And that's because humans are more complicated than rodents, not necessarily so much in our physical bodies. We're actually very similar, but the way we live our lives is different. Um, and so I think it's kind of important to consider all of that with this data. So, you can find even like a peer-reviewed research article. You can find a peer-reviewed article to support just about any hypothesis at this point. They're widely published. There's open access journals and other, there's a ranking system when it comes to peer-reviewed literature, and there's kind of journals that are considered to kind of to be um I don't want to say more elite, but maybe a little bit more credible than others. And there are others where it's a lot easier to publish just about anything in them. And that's not to say that, all data is interesting, right? All data tells us something, but we want to be cognizant of the fact that like the data we have supports the conclusions that we're making, and many times with especially in the case of these diets it truly does not. And it infuriates me because you see people, even things like the South Beach diet and the Atkins diet, um those the cardiologists who wrote those, while like there may be some benefits for some people, but they very much cherry picked the data. They didn't look at the other side of the coin. And kind of, it's, you pick a handful of studies, you can write a pretty convincing hypothesis. And, it's infuriating when health professionals do it, but if health professionals are doing it, that then gives credibility to that one-sided story. And of course, the free media or the free press and like social media and things like that are going to pick it up, right? So I think that's kind of why it happens. Actually starts at the health professional level, and then kind of expands and just kind of it's kind of like a game of telephone then at that point, right? That every like little misunderstanding that was, or even kind of cherry picked or one-sidedness that was in the original text is then going to get amplified in the news media, and then that's going to get amplified on social media, and then that's going to get really amplified in the general population to where we have the original hypothesis was wrong and slanted and flawed, but then it becomes hugely flawed by the end of the day. And I don't think that that's necessarily irresponsibility in publishing. I think it's truly one, like I said, it starts with irresponsible health professionals who are either just irresponsible because they don't know enough to take into account kind of the big picture, or they're irresponsible because they're frankly just after money. And then kind of as that again, that misunderstanding happens, or not necessarily misunderstanding, but as that, how do I want to word this? As that one-sided hypothesis kind of makes its way into the world, it's given certain level of credibility, and then the news media and everything else just kind of rolls with it. So I think that's kind of why we're starting to see this happen so much. And it's why, if you go to look up anything, it can be massively, massively confusing. And I think most people, when it comes to nutrition, if they look something up, they want to, they might kind of read a couple of different sites, but they're kind of looking for those pieces of evidence that line up, right? So they're kind of looking like, okay, the carnivore diet, for example, is going to help, it's going to help me lose weight, it's going to help lower my blood pressure. There may be some kind of key points in kind of news media that's going to kind of discuss the mechanisms behind why that may happen. Um, And again, that's gonna kind of, okay, I'm seeing this in multiple sources. That means it's probably true, right? And I get that logic. I really do. But that doesn't mean it's true. It just means multiple sources that wrote those article read the same lie or the same, again, like kind of, it's not always necessarily a lie, but it's more of like a one-sidedness. So kind of to give you, a key example. There was recently a study that looked at the actual negative impacts of keto, and it's kind of, dietitians and really a lot of health professionals kind of everywhere have been screaming for a very long time that keto is not safe, it's not healthy, it's actually highly problematic. The problem was all of even the research on keto, it's like we know as health professionals, we know based on anecdotal evidence of the patients that we see that it's harmful. We know based on kind of basic physiology that it's harmful or bound to be harmful, but we didn't have the evidence base to back it up because all of the evidence that we have, all of the studies that we have are like praising keto, right? But all of those studies, again, generally pretty small populations, um, only very short time spans, so like 3 to 6 months are kind of like the average study length, and things like that, and there's just kind of, and those are all things, to be clear, that the researchers pointed out in their own limitations, right? They in the paper, they published that, like, these are the limitations of the study, we need more long-term studies, but those long-term studies just hadn't been done, and they hadn't come out yet because, like, there hadn't been enough time, if that makes sense. Now we're kind of to the back end where we're looking at these things 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. We're like, oh wow, that's really problematic. And public, same scientists who were like kind of proposed for keto things before are kind of like, well, maybe we need to take a little another look at this. And I don't think it's an irresponsibility of the researchers per se, but I think kind of once the news media kind of takes hold of it, it loses sight of the nuance. Um, and again, I think that's kind of where, I don't know if anybody has read the Washington Post. It's probably my least favorite, my least favorite publication ever. They kind of recently came out with an article that bashed dietitians for having kind of, a weight positive, inclusive type practice, and like, oh, like people just gained weight, blah blah blah. Did not discuss at all the harms that weight bias causes in healthcare, and in medical research for that matter. So again, it's very, very easy to kind of create these kind of one-sided storylines and not kind of look at the flip side of that coin. So I think, kind of when you're looking at this type of data. So again, like my intention is not necessarily to come on here and bash Joe Rogan per se, or anyone like him. I don't think that this is wholly his fault. And I don't think it's wholly anyone's fault. I think it's, it kind of starts with scientific literature, whether it's published in a way that is responsible and speaks to both sides and speaks to its limitations, or it's you know published in a rather irresponsible and one-sided way. It's still a lot of that nuance is just going to get lost kind of through the game of telephone, is kind of getting those things to the popular press. Um and so I think it's kind of, as we learn to navigate this world, and then, most people, like, let's be honest, are going to go to Google for nutrition information, for a lot of health information for that matter. I think it's, one, super important that, like, if it's something that, like, you're considering doing, that you talk to a health professional about it. Somebody, not just like a health professional, like in general, but like somebody who knows you, knows your medical history. I think that that's really important. Most of us at the very least have a primary care doctor that knows, medications that we're taking, family history, our personal health history, and can at least provide some insight as to what may or may not be appropriate for you. Um, Obviously, of course, if you want to talk to a dietitian, that makes my heart so happy, because and doctors and PAs and nurse practitioners, they will all admit that they don't know jack about nutrition compared to dietitians. That's how that may not be practical for everybody, and I get that. Um, when you are researching stuff online, I think it's, really important to look at the studies that are cited. So most journalistic articles are going to cite where they get their information from. And I think it's very important to recognize that, like, not every journalist, and certainly not every, average person is going to understand those articles at baseline. So I mean, like, the journalists are just lay people, just like, people who don't do this research, they don't live in this world, and they're just trying to understand it. Now, journal articles are intended to be written to where somebody who has kind of, a very basic understanding should at least be able to kind of follow along. But that said, I mean, they're not intended for lay media, so they're kind of trying to take it and translate it. I think somebody, frankly, who would be better suited to do that is have a health professional do that, right? Have us read the research and then try to transcribe it. And a lot of dietitians have blogs for that reason. I do. Um, I know many others that do, to kind of help kind of make that a little less clear. But if you're looking at something that's kind of on a major site, so, places like Healthline and stuff like that can be really, really dicey. So just kind of, be careful, look back to the studies, and at the very least, look at how many participants were in the study and how long it was conducted. If you're looking for nutrition research, that is. Nutrition research, again, tells us very little if it's only done for a short period of time, but if it's done over the course of years, it may have some more substance behind it. I think the other thing to pay attention to, or even kind of try to seek out, is more kind of, I don't wanna say, like, validated sources, but validated sources, right? So, like, an article written in, say, the Washington Post is really meant to foster discussion, whereas an article written by the Mayo Clinic is really meant to educate. So I think, and honestly, even, like, WebMD has become kind of a sketchy place these days. So, like, places like the Mayo Clinic, there's, WebMD is fine. Um, the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, like, those types of places actually have pretty decent educational resources tied to them, because I mean, like, they're, again, that's what they're there for. So I think it's kind of, as much as you can, try to get your information from those types of places. That said, that's not going to be the first thing that pops up on a Google search. So just kind of be mindful of where the articles are coming from, look at who wrote them, what, if any, credentials they had, look at the studies that they cite. And, you just need to pull up the abstract, and you should be able to see, okay, how long was the study run? How many people participated in it? And I think that'll kind of give you a little bit of, an idea of, like, okay, well, how sound is this research? And I want to be clear that all research is important, right? Even those small studies, even the ones that are short, they help inform the larger and longer studies. Sometimes we need to kind of start somewhere, see if there's an effect, and then kind of follow that road. That said, we shouldn't be making grand conclusions and kind of, coming up with population wide recommendations based on a small study done for a short period of time and a small handful of patients. We need the big studies for that. And again, the small studies are very important, but they're not the ones that we should be using to make kind of these bigger recommendations. And again, it's kind of like, this is early evidence, and it should be presented as such. Sometimes it is by the researchers, and that gets lost in the news media. Sometimes it's not by the researchers, and it's just kind of irresponsible on them. But again, it's a wild world out there. So I just wanted to come on and kind of give you guys my 2 cents about it, and just kind of a couple of things to look for, as you kind of try to navigate it. Because I know, as much as I try to be the resource for you, many of you are gonna, you're gonna get information from other places, honestly, whether you want to or not. So there's my 2 cents on it. I look forward, frankly, to hearing what you all have to say in the comments about this. I would love to hear other nutrition things that you have come across or read. And we can, I may even, like, make another podcast out of it. But as far as the carnivore diet goes, don't waste your time. Don't waste your time. It's not good for you. There's basically no data behind it. I don't even know how it's gotten this far. Um, and yeah, definitely eat a whole variety of foods. You can include meat, but definitely, include all fruits, all vegetables, all grains, all starches, unless you're allergic to them, as always. So that is it for today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you next time.